In the last lesson, we talked a little bit about percents and how to go back and forth between a percent and a fraction. What we're going to talk about today is how to go back and forth between a percent and a decimal, which actually involves using the fraction. So we're going to walk through the steps to go back and forth between the two. On your screen, you have a percentage. The first thing we're going to talk about is how to turn a percentage into a decimal. So one way that you could turn a percentage into a decimal is to take the percentage and write it in fraction form first. So that we were doing in the last lesson. So if we take an example of 36%, we can turn that into 36 out of 100 or 36 100ths. It's really important that the denominator of your fraction is a power of 10. So basically what that means is that needs to be a number that is part of our decimal system. So place values in our decimal system are hundreds place, tens place, ones place, tenths place, 100ths place, 1000ths place. So if we have 100ths, that is a place value in our decimal system. So from there, we can convert to decimal form using the place value based on the fraction's denominator. So since this has a denominator of 100 in our decimal system, this is the tenths place, and this is the hundredths place. So since this is 36 hundredths, we would turn it into a decimal that has hundredths. So 36 hundredths as a decimal would be 0.36. So that turns the fraction or the percentage into a decimal. Sometimes we have to do a little bit of adjusting with that system. So if you have something like this that's 36%, most people would look at that and think, oh, 36 out of 100, 36 hundredths, 0.36, and be able to convert it pretty quickly. Some percentages are a little bit trickier though. So this one, 42.5%. So when we turn something into a fraction, we can't have a decimal inside a fraction. That violates the definition of what a fraction is supposed to be. So we could initially turn this into a fraction, but then we're going to have to get rid of the decimal here. So the way we can get rid of that is by scaling the fraction up or making it bigger. Since our number system is based off of groups of 10, if we multiply by 10, it will change this to a whole number. So 42.5 times 10 would make it 425, and then we don't have a decimal inside our fraction anymore. But if we're going to multiply the top, we also have to multiply the bottom. 100 times 10 is 1,000. So that means this is 425 1,000ths. So in our place value system, there's the tenths place, the hundredths place, and the thousandths place. So we would have three numbers after the decimal point, 0.425. So that's how you can turn a percentage into a decimal. If we want to go the other way, then we can basically reverse that process. So we're going to write the fraction based on the place value, write the percent from the decimal. We're going to start by writing a fraction based on place value from the decimal. So again, we've shown this a couple of times, but we need to remember how place value works. So the first number after is the tenths place, and then the 100ths place, and then the 1,000ths place, and then the 1/10,000ths place, and it keeps going. So we need to remember basically what fractions match with those spots in order to ultimately get from a decimal to a percent. So if we're starting with a decimal, again, our first step is to take the decimal and write a fraction based on the place value from the decimal. So that is the hundredths place. So this would be 34 100ths. So if we convert that to a fraction, it would look like 34 over 100. If we need to, then our next step would be to scale the fraction to have a denominator of 100. So once we turn our decimal into a fraction, we're basically doing what we did yesterday, going from decimal to fraction and then going from fraction to decimal. But we already practiced going from fraction to decimal. So if you can get the fraction, then you can just do what we were already doing. This already has a denominator of 100, which means we can just grab that top number and that's our percentage. So 0.34, the decimal, would be 34%. Again, sometimes you have to get a little bit creative. So if you have a longer decimal, something like this, so you would write a fraction based on the place value from the decimal. So if we look at the last place, that's the 10,000ths place. So as a fraction, this would be 4,325 10,000ths. So that turns it into a fraction. But again, like what we were doing yesterday, we said that in order to turn this into a percent, we have to take the denominator of the fraction and make it be 100. So in this case, because 10,000 is bigger, we would need to scale down or divide our fraction. So 10,000, if I divide it by 100, 10,000 by 100 gives me the correct denominator to get my percentage, denominator of 100. But if I divide the bottom, I also have to divide the top. 4,325 divided by 100 is 43.25. So now that I have a denominator of 100, I can grab the numerator, and that is my percentage. So it really is reversing reversing what we were doing before when we were going from a percent to a decimal. So a good foolproof way to go back and forth between decimals and percentages without ending up with things out of place is to use the fraction as a stepping stone. So go from percent to fraction to decimal, or decimal to fraction to percent, and then you can rely on the things that we were working with yesterday about just going back and forth with fractions and percents.